Hello and welcome to episode 400 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert. As always, Damien Fay and me, Andy Leaks. Damien, 400, we made it. How are you doing?
I'm good, and it is exciting that we made the 400th show. I mean, it was something that has crept up on us, and it wasn't something that we were planning to do a big thing about. In fact, we're not. We're going to carry on as usual. I think we've always had in our head, Andy, which just shows the level of commitment that we have to this podcast. It was 500. We did the sort of 100, the 250, and then the 500 was our next big milestone in our heads. But we should pat ourselves on the back for getting to 400 episodes of the Sunday podcast, because don't forget the market update that I do. We have done about 150 episodes of that. So technically, adding the podcast together in our stream, there are already more than 500 episodes of, well, either me and you or me talking. So yeah, we should congratulate ourselves on that, given that we didn't even plan or didn't think necessarily that the podcast would work when we started it, 8-9 years ago.
Yeah, we should pat ourselves on the back. Look, there's not going to be many podcasts out there that have done over 550 episodes in total. And actually, when you look back, 8-9 years ago, you said, when we started, we didn't know where it would lead. And I wasn't even working for Money to the Masses back then, which of course I am now. And the website's gone from strength to strength. And actually, Damien, I'm not sure all the listeners know where we started, because technology has improved as much as anything else as well. And you and I used to drive to each other. To be fair, you did most of the driving. 50 miles?
Well, I was going to say, Andy, don't make out you were driving to my house. I was driving 50 miles each way. So I was doing a 100-mile round trip to do each episode early days. But luckily, technology has moved on. On the note of doing 400 episodes, please do leave a review if you haven't done on our podcast. Even if you have left a review in the past but not done so recently, you can technically review the podcast more than once. So please do leave a review if you appreciate the effort that we've done in all these episodes. And the other big thing I want to point out, and we're going to get better at this in 2023 and onwards, is that if you ever make a financial decision, like compare products, whether it be credit cards, it could be things like home insurance, car insurance, travel insurance, investment platforms, we cover all of that at Money to the Masses. So over time, we do all of that. We compare them, we write articles. So go to the Money to the Masses website, click on the drop downs at the top of the site, and you can find articles, reviews, best buys, comparison tables about all of those products. And occasionally we can also make some money in the background through third-party partnerships. It doesn't make a difference to what we say about products and services. The way to think of it, if you don't come through us and help us keep the lights on and keep all this free, you're just helping people like Martin Lewis and all the others and all those big companies, because when you end up comparing products, that is what you're doing. Someone somewhere may ultimately get some kind of income for referring a customer. So if you want to help Money to the Masses, you want to help keep the lights on, you want more of what we do, then do make sure that whenever you think about doing something, come to the Money to the Masses website and see if there is a review of the product you have, or more information about maybe the best travel insurance and stuff like that, cat insurance, pet insurance, you name it. And not only will there be information, occasionally you can help support us as well. So with all that back patting and admin done, getting on with the podcast, this show is going to be focused on health insurance. So all aspects of it, including things like private GP appointments. One point is worth pointing out, in the cost of living crisis that we're in, there will be a lot of people, unfortunately, that are going to lose their jobs if we have a recession. And some people may lose health insurance benefits that they have through work. And so they will be looking to try and replace those benefits or try and find something that's cost effective. So this podcast will be covering all of those options, so people can at least look at some alternatives if they are concerned about the fact they are going to lose some of these benefits if they lose their job, or they can't afford to keep paying for them personally. Now, I don't want people to switch off because we're going to be talking about health insurance, because if you're worried about waiting lists, for example, you're hearing news stories about people having to wait for a long time to be diagnosed with conditions, for example, there are policies out there that aren't expensive that can help with that diagnosis, that then you can get treatment on the NHS. So these things can be cheap. They don't have to cost thousands of pounds. So I want people to know what their options are. Then they can make their own decisions. Now, the reason we're doing this is because we cover all areas of personal finance. We're unusual in that we get to see consumer trends in the UK and what people are most concerned about. And at the moment, one of the trends that is growing in strength at the moment, and is getting a lot of people's attention, is to do with the state of the NHS and the alternative options for people. Now, before people write in and start to say that private health insurance or what we're about to talk about undermines the NHS, blah, 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 then please do save yourself the time and effort, because you won't meet someone else who relies so much on the NHS and champions what they do. Because obviously with my Crohn's and everything, I spent a lot of time in hospitals over the years, and I still occasionally do. So what we're doing is responding to people's concerns about the alternatives, because obviously the system is broken, but people do have access to alternatives that they aren't aware of. So if you think that we're a bit like Bear Grylls, we're teaching people how to survive in this environment with personal finance, then it also means that we should talk about some of the benefits that they may have they don't realise that might help them in scenarios with their own personal health. As the 400th episode, it's quite nice because I'm going to be doing less talking. So Andy, this is one of his areas of expertise, so I'm going to hand a lot of it over to Andy, and you'll hear me chip in from time to time. So Andy, with that intro out of the way, I'm going to hand straight over to you.
Okay, yeah, so health insurance is a hot topic at the moment, and to be honest, there is a lot to cover, which is why we're going to focus on this particular subject for the whole of this episode. It's kind of a podcast special covering private healthcare. The first thing I want to mention is a few episodes that we've done in the past that does a bit more of a deeper dive into the technical aspects of the cover and also the benefits of the cover as well. And they are episodes, so get your pen handy. We will put details of this in the show notes, of course. So episode 235, where we talked about private medical insurance in detail. We did a deeper dive into what it is, who should get it, and how much it costs. Episode 292, we spoke about ways that you could cut health insurance costs. So if you're someone that already has health insurance and knows the benefits and enjoys it, but wants to cut down the cost, take a listen to that one. Episode 295 was a brilliant podcast that we did with Emma Thompson, who was unfortunate enough to get a cancer diagnosis. And we talked about the benefits of various different protection products, and also talked about health insurance specifically and how her policy helped speed up her diagnosis and treatment. And finally, episode 338, we talked about when you should claim on insurance, and Harvey went into detail about the claims process on health insurance and when it is worth claiming versus self-funding diagnosis and treatment of various health insurance policies. Okay, so when we were planning on what to do with this podcast, I was trying to think about what is the best way to get through it and explain the products and services that are available. And I think the best way to do it is just to go through it step by step and look at people's situation and give them solutions. So I think a lot of people, and we certainly see this from the data that we're seeing on the website and via trends, is they're worried about getting seen because of the NHS queues. So let's first of all talk about GP appointments. I know from personal experience that myself and my family are struggling to get seen by our GP at the moment. We had an issue over Christmas, and it was a real struggle to get to see a doctor, because obviously once you get to see a doctor, you can get your prescriptions, your treatment, and possibly if you need scans and investigations, at least that starts the process. But if you're having to wait weeks for your doctor's appointment, then that's going to really start to impact getting treated. So the first thing I would say on GP appointments is check to see if you've already got some kind of policy that will give you access to private GP appointments. So you may have some work benefits, for example, that give you access to these. So do check and speak to your HR representative at work if you're employed and see if there is anything available that enables you to get access. Another thing to check is other policies that you have. So you may, for example, have a life insurance policy or a critical illness policy. And there are policies nowadays that do give you some ancillary benefits, one of those being virtual GP access. Vitality are a really good example of that. If you've got a Vitality policy, you will often get virtual GP access, and that will be either a telephone call or you can do effectively a Zoom meeting with a private GP, and that's all included.
So one of the key messages really on this is that go to work, check if you have any benefits. If you have some kind of group life insurance at work, or you have some other benefits, maybe it's a group income protection, you may even have group health insurance, but even something just like life insurance, they will often have these benefits of access to a virtual GP associated with it. And so go to work, ask about your benefits, then find out what the scheme is and go and look to see if they have these, because they do more often than not. And also, what about your partner? Because if your partner has benefits at work, they may have access to these virtual GPs, but they will likely cover the children and they will also likely cover you. So what it means is that there are hundreds and thousands, if not probably millions of people who don't realise that they have this free benefit through their job. And HR departments, it's not their thing to go around and tell people about it, how to register with it. Because when you get these benefits, normally you have to download an app and you have to register with it. Do it ahead of time, which is a key part. So not to get too personal, but we had a situation internally at Money to the Masses where somebody's child was unwell and ended up using these services. They're 24/7, unlike NHS GPs, to be able to get access to a GP who then did a virtual diagnosis, issued a prescription for that child on a weekend, and they were able to get the medicines that they need. So lots of people listening to this won't realise, but they have access to that probably already, which is one big message. If you take away anything from this podcast, is that you probably have this somewhere along the line. Double check if you do. It may mean that you or a family member may be able to get that treatment sooner rather than later if it's something that isn't major.
That's it. And just as Damien said, then make sure if and when you're able to find that this policy exists and you have to download the app, do that administration, do it ahead of time, because you'll be thankful of that advice when it comes to claiming. Because I know from personal experience that if you don't do it ahead of time and you have to provide documentation, say for a child, birth certificates, things like this, the prescription will often not be issued because of data protection and everything else until they've received that information. So you're at the whims of them in terms of their administration, which could delay the whole process and kind of render the whole thing pointless if you don't do it ahead of time. So make sure you do that. It's really good advice. Of course, I'll just finally caveat this. If you haven't got any access to any of these services and you are absolutely desperate, you can access these services by paying. And there are private GP appointments you can book. And we've done an article on that. And again, I'll put those in the show notes. So let's move on to the next thing then. So we've looked at seeing a GP. Let's carry on that theme of diagnosis. If your primary concern is you want to get seen, you want to find out what's wrong with you, and you don't want to get lost in the backlog of what is quite a crippled NHS at the moment, there are certain policies out there which come under the health insurance banner, but aren't strictly full health insurance that provide you with all of those benefits that include treatment. So it's effectively a cheaper policy than full private health insurance, but it does provide you with some benefits that enable you to get ahead of the queue. So let's talk about a couple. The first one I want to talk about is diagnostics cover. It's called various different things, but if you think about it, it's basically going to get you seen by a specialist and get your diagnosis so that you can start that process of understanding what it is you have and how you may get treated. So there are various covers out there that you could look at. I'll give a couple of examples. Aviva offers a diagnostics insurance, and that policy will effectively get you seen quickly. You'll get speedy diagnosis. You'll get access to a private consultant and specialists, the tests that you need. And essentially then that gives you the ability to be able to work with that and understand what the next step is. And obviously, if you're concerned about very serious illnesses, getting seen quickly, understanding what it is that you have may well be your primary concern, because what this does is it does buy you time. The basic cost for that cover is somewhere in the region of £1 to £2 a day. So you can probably get diagnostics cover, depending on your age, for around about £25 to £50 a month.
So before we move on that, Andy, does the premium change depending on your medical history?
The premium itself isn't based on your medical history, but you do need to be aware of your medical history because it does impact what you can claim for on the cover. For example, the policy is underwritten on what they call a moratorium basis, which essentially means that anything that you've previously had is excluded. So let's say you've already got something, you've got an existing diagnosis, perhaps it's getting worse, you want another test, another scan to see how it's progressing. This policy wouldn't really cover you. You're already in the NHS queue for that existing condition that you have. This is more for something that you're concerned about may happen in the future. And to explain that moratorium underwriting, it's kind of a technical term that insurers use. Essentially, you're not covered for anything that you've received medication, treatment, or advice for in the last 5 years. But, and here's the but, which is a good thing, once you have taken out that cover, if you do remain treatment, medication and advice free of a particular condition in the past for 2 years, then that will become covered on the policy. So just because you've had something in the past doesn't mean to say you won't be able to actually get cover for it in the future. You just need to have a period of where you're not actually suffering from that condition. So carrying on the theme of diagnosis, if you're worried about getting seen quickly, another option for you is something called Benenden Health Insurance, and it's something slightly different. I'll just explain what it is. It's a fixed price policy that's going to get you speedy diagnosis. The price is £11.90 per person per month, and that is currently fixed. And that price won't go up as you get older or if you claim on the policy. But of course, like anything with the cost of living crisis and everything, the price may well increase in the future because it is reviewed annually based on the service cost. There's no age limits on this policy, no quotes, and no excess to pay. So it's a really simple plan in terms of what you're getting. You pay a fixed price for a service. Now, what is that service? What are you getting for your money? Well, firstly, we talked about GP consultations earlier. You'll be covered from day one for private GP access. So this is a way that you could immediately get access to private GPs by paying your first premium on a Benenden health insurance policy. In addition to that, there is a phone line where you can get mental health support, and there is an additional helpline where you can talk about care planning and social care advice. So they're the three main packages of support that you get from day one. However, in order to access the full suite of products, you do actually have to pay 6 months of premiums to get what I would call the main benefits of the policy, which is the diagnostics part of the plan. So after 6 months, you'll get access to products and services that include medical diagnostics, additional medical treatments, some physiotherapies, and also cancer support. I'll quickly run through what effectively that means, what you're actually covered for, and some of the exclusions. So you can kind of benchmark this against what we talk about later, which is a more comprehensive health insurance policy. So there is a claim limit, first of all. You'll find when we talk about later about limits, a lot of the main health insurance policies won't have limits, or the limits are much, much higher. But the limits on this Benenden health insurance is £1,800, and so you will be expected to fund anything over that. And if you think about medical care, medical tests and diagnostics, some of them can run to being quite expensive, so that you might find you hit that limit quite quickly if you are someone who needs a certain amount of tests and investigations to see what it is that you've got. So let's quickly run through the exclusions on that plan then. So we mentioned that it will cover diagnostics after 6 months. It won't cover any appointments which are not for a diagnosis purpose. Let's say, for example, you've got some family history and you're just intrigued to know whether you've got a certain condition. You can't just book it up. It has to be something you're actually experiencing symptoms of. It doesn't cover you for cosmetic concerns. Angiograms are not covered. So if you're worried particularly about your heart, it doesn't cover that. Specialist assistance for pain management, complementary therapy, any second opinion consultations, or any diagnosis where, in Benenden's view, it may be safe for you to remain within the NHS waiting list, like psychiatry, etc., or suspended cancer diagnoses, they won't be covered. So there are a few exclusions there, but most of those exclusions are fairly standard, and you would probably expect them to be there. Now, the Benenden health insurance product also covers medical treatment, but again, there are exclusions for many types of surgery. This certainly isn't a replacement for what I would consider the full private health insurance product that we'll go on to talk about later. So exclusions include brain-related surgeries, cancer-related surgeries, heart-related surgeries, and again, we covered cosmetic earlier. Cosmetic surgeries are excluded. Any emergency surgery, reconstructive surgery, acute care, anything related to fractures, spinal surgery, pregnancy-related surgery, joint replacements, or anything related to pain management. So actually, when you distill that information down, that is what most people would need some kind of private healthcare cover for, or what they would consider that they would be buying a product for in order to cover. I think the best way to explain the Benenden health cover is from day one, you're going to be able to see a GP, and after 6 months, you're going to get access to some specialists and hopefully get referred and seen and get your diagnosis.
So you can see why Andy's talking mostly on this podcast, because he knows all about this stuff. But that's a nice summary, because I was just going to highlight myself that where we've got to on this podcast, for a lot of people, they may already have access to those virtual GP services already through financial products they have personally, life insurance, for example, income protection, or through work. But for those people who want that, but then also maybe want to have diagnosis, so they aren't stuck waiting on some of the NHS waiting lines that might concern them, then you've got what Andy's talked about, these diagnostic policies like, for example, Benenden Health. But the 6 month thing is in there when they talk about you won't get that. It's to stop people taking out the policy and immediately knowing there's something wrong and putting a claim in to try and get a diagnosis on day one. So that's why there's that 6 month wait in there, which is understandable.
And on that, I probably should have mentioned is that existing conditions are actually covered. And so you could take out a Benenden health insurance on the basis that you you want to be seen for something you already have. But of course, you've got that 6-month waiting period, by which time, of course, if you're already in the NHS queue, you may well get seen on there. So you could hedge your bets and use this and get ahead of the queue.
And as you say, it doesn't have that moratorium feature on there. It actually covers it, but you've just got to wait the 6 months before you can get that diagnostics.
Okay, so let's move on to the final sort of solution, if you like, and that is private health insurance. Now, health insurance itself is fairly complex, and we'll explain at the end of the podcast how you can tailor the policies to your own personal budget and needs, because these kind of policies really do need someone to help hold your hand and find the best solution for your needs in terms of your budget and everything else. So healthcare itself can be broadly broken down into three sort of categories. You've effectively got a budget option, an intermediate option, and then a comprehensive option. Now, most health insurance providers will probably call their products all something different, which is part of the problem in terms of the complexity. But if you just think about it, that you can effectively go for what is their cheapest plan, which will give you basic benefits. They will have a sort of middle plan that will give you a few more benefits and access to a few other things. And then you've got their all singing, all dancing. And of course, that's going to come at 3 different cost levels. So if we explain it like that, that kind of gives you a broad description of what's available. And again, listen to our other podcasts where we've done a deeper dive into those. And some of the providers I'm talking about here, which I'm sure you've seen advertised around, it will be AXA Health, Bupa, Vitality, Aviva. Those are the kind of names of providers that we're looking at here. The benefits of this type of health insurance, let's quickly run through some of those so you know what you're going to be getting for your money. You're going to get access to private consultations through the doctors that we spoke about earlier. You'll get diagnostics included with that, so you'll be able to get referred and seen, and you'll get your tests and investigations and scans. If you then subsequently need to be treated, you should have access to treatments and therapies that you need, hospital accommodation, surgery, and then depending on the policy, you'll get some post-treatment care as well in terms of follow-ups and maybe physiotherapy. So these kind of policies are your all singing, all dancing access to diagnostics and treatment. And depending on how comprehensive the cover is that you go for, you'll get inpatient and day patient care. It includes your surgery, nursing care, drugs, dressings, specialist fees, consultations. And actually, in some cases, if you end up getting referred to the NHS for treatment, you can actually receive cash payments up to £50 a night, up to £2,000 a year. So there's lots of these ancillary benefits that are added in. And in some cases, on some policies, you actually get access to drugs and services that aren't available at all on the NHS.
Okay, so just to pull it together then, Andy, if we're looking at costs, then obviously it depends very much on where you live, the product you're going to have, what's covered, etc. And we had the Benedin Health option, which was £11 a month. If we're talking about these different types of health insurance, broadly speaking, I'd say the full cover is probably going to be north of £150 a month for a family of 4. So that is a big difference. So what about the basic then, Andy? Is like finger in the air, because then at least people know a kind of range that they're looking at if they ever wanted a budget for this stuff.
So for the basic healthcare for an individual, depending on your age again, because there will be huge swings between a 20-year-old and a 40-year-old. So if you're in your 20s, I mean, the basic healthcare package, you're probably looking around about £20 to £25 a month. But as you get older, that is going to be going up. Look, ballpark, maybe £35, £40 for an individual. And then for a family, maybe £120 for the basic package. But again, I'm just finger in the air stuff, just giving people an idea. If you're in your 30s or 40s, you're probably looking at £30 or £40. Use that as a basic guide.
And it's also worth me pointing out, I mentioned earlier on in the podcast about if people do leave a workplace scheme for whatever reason, then do look into the option of being able to continue the cover personally if you are thinking about taking out health insurance after you've had to leave a job. So that is an option for you, but you need to speak to that provider ASAP.
I suppose the final thing I just wanted to point out is there are other insurance policies that you may already have in place that could work alongside health insurance. And I'm talking about things like income protection and critical illness cover, because an income protection policy will provide a replacement income while you're unable to work. And obviously that money can be key in terms of you and your recovery. And a critical illness policy pays out on a diagnosis of a serious illness. And so a critical illness policy, because it pays out on a diagnosis, it will pay a sum of money you could, for example, use that sum of money and go and use that for private treatment. You could even use it to go abroad and get treatment if treatment isn't available in the UK. It gives you extra choice and potentially gives you time to consider your options. So it can be used alongside healthcare. Obviously, don't use it as a replacement because it will only cover you for a set amount of serious illnesses.
So having listened to all of that, then if you are pondering some kind of policy, maybe a health insurance policy or something alternative that we've mentioned, then how do you go about, what are the best options? How do you go about costing out? Who do you need to speak to? Now, we provide a link in the notes to a company that provides advice on these sorts of options. And I have vetted that service. So I have been there, I've seen what they do and seen how they do it. So it is a company that provides a good service to people. That is part of why I go down there and look at these things. And so you can go and speak to those people. It doesn't cost you anything, and you can see what your options are. And it's up to you whether you want to take it further. So that is it then, Andy. We are done for this week, aren't we? I mean, you did a lot of the talking, so I will close out the end of this podcast to save your voice. So thank you to everybody who's listened to the podcast over these 400 episodes. We look forward to the 500th episode, but please do make sure you review the podcast. Also join the Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/money to the masses. And of course, do make sure you follow us on all of our social channels as well. So that is it, Andy. Until next time.
Until next time.